Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Epstein alleged Trump spent hours with one of his victims in emails released by the Democrats. The White House says it's an attempt to smear the president. President Trump says he has an obligation to sue the BBC over the way it edited a speech he made. India's government says Monday's car explosion in Delhi was a terrorist incident. A Russian foreign ministry official has said Russia is ready to resume peace negotiations with Ukraine in Istanbul. President Donald Trump has said he has an obligation to sue the BBC over the way it edited a speech he made in January 2021 before the attack on the US Capitol. In an interview with Fox News Channel's The Ingram Angle, he also said the speech has been butchered and defrauded viewers. Take a listen.
They actually changed my January 6th speech, which was a beautiful speech, which was a very calming speech, and they made it sound radical. And they actually changed it. What they did was rather incredible. They're showing me the results later on, the results of what they did, how they butchered it up. But it was very dishonest, and the head man quit, and a lot of the other people.
Right. You are saying to our viewers that you will go forward and file a defamation lawsuit against the BBC.
Well, I think I have an obligation to do it because you can't allow people to do that.
For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Fawad Razik, British and international affairs analyst and former BBC Arabic editor. Doctor, it's brilliant to have you back on the show. Thank you for joining me. So Donald Trump.
Thank you very much, Leigh-Ann.
Pleasure. So Donald Trump's threatening to sue the BBC for $1 billion following a documentary which misled viewers by editing a speech he made. Will the BBC apologise before the Friday deadline to the US president or respond to the letter that's been sent?
As a matter of fact, it is a legal action, and it's up to the BBC to go and give a response to that. Yeah, and we don't know the kind of action they will take, but they have to meet this deadline. If it's a matter of apology, I think the apology was made already, but if made officially by the BBC, it won't cause any harm. And the other conditions that they should withdraw or amend the documentary to correct the mistakes editorially done. And then comes the compensation, not necessarily this huge sum of money, but it could come to a compromise. But at the end of the day, it's up to the BBC to answer to this point. But anyhow, what the President Trump said is right, because it did the damage. But how far the damage at that time and assessing it now, it might be a different issue. Depends whether this panorama was shown in certain areas in the US or not. And this might affect, this is something, a legal argument that could be settled somewhere or another. Even the settlement in terms of money could be discussed, as discussed with other media outlet sued by President Trump.
Yes, indeed. Donald Trump has sued other media outlets in the US, but lots of questions have been raised after the BBC released this Panorama documentary, and a lot of questions are being asked about this massive editorial failure that was made. Do you think that the BBC is institutionally biased?
I don't think so. And this thing had been refuted by so many people, especially, for example, the Secretary of Culture, Lisa. And she said there is a difference between between criticizing the BBC for the editorial failings and attacking the BBC as an establishment and accusing it of institutionally biased. I myself don't think it is institutionally biased, but it put the BBC in a very critical and sensitive position because the BBC in all cases is damn if it did and damn if it didn't, that sort of thing, and that put a burden on the BBC. What's good about this, that the BBC apologized. When they recognize any mistakes or any failings, they come out and either apologize for it and then take action to it. Maybe the only criticism is that the action is taken slowly and after a long thought. Now, we're talking about hindsight now, but this is something that should have been tackled on the spot at the same time and taking the procedure they should have taken. But some people, for example, consider this as a coup from the right against the BBC or against even the chairman of the BBC. But it could be interpreted differently, It is not a real coup, but it's a coup in the sense that, the attack against the BBC as an establishment, and they want to destroy the BBC. There are some voices to that effect, like Nigel Farage as well, who's not happy with the establishment of the BBC, and he is siding with President Trump. President Trump accused the BBC as well of being, the journalists being corrupt, and this is not right. And even Prime Minister Starmer defended the BBC in that sense and said it is not a corrupt establishment, but he left the legal argument for the BBC and for the legal to take its course in that sense. So there is some defense for the BBC, but this doesn't mean that the failing of editorial failing has happened, and it was really a fatal mistake. And this panorama could represent the straw that breaks the camel's back, as we say in Arabic. So this brought everything, is because it's not the first time that the BBC get criticized. There are so many issues before, whether editorially or managerially, that happened, and it put the BBC in a very bad light.
Sorry, Doctor,
Yes.
I just wanted to intervene just to talk to you a little bit more about what the chair of the BBC said in a letter. He said that BBC Arabic has been restructured following concerns raised over the coverage favouring Hamas. You worked with BBC Arabic. How concerning are these accusations when you hear the chair speak about this and concerns being raised in that part of the BBC?
I had actually Director General, and I heard Mr. Samir Shah as well. The focus is in a strange way, is on the Arabic service, and that they intervened in such a way that the service was not going the right direction, and they put a break onto this, whether in the editorial line or even on the level of terminology. And so many cases, like the numbers of people all being biased against Israel or anything like that. But for me, without my experience, everything is actually comes under scrutiny. And, people, even recently, because I left the BBC a long time ago, 2011, but came back as a freelancer. And we were very careful, actually, with our terminology, our thing. And there is something the BBC is happy about, which I don't actually condone, that if the two parties if the two sides are not happy with you, that means they are not right. BBC believes that in this theory, but the BBC role is not to defend or refute any things. It has to give the facts and leave the audience to decide for themselves. Of course, there was some pressure on the team, even the management, to come with a question that could be presented as objective effective because the main principles of the BBC, objectivity, neutrality, balance, have been badly affected by this panorama thing and some other cases of another issue as well that would damage the image of the BBC and let accusations come its own way. But the BBC was trying to come middle course, but some issues you cannot do this kind of middle course or that you are against both sides, which means you are right, because this doesn't make the right balance, especially editorially and editorial judgment.
So, Doctor, sorry, I just wanted to intervene there just to ask you, the BBC's charter is being reviewed as it expires in 2007. Do you believe it should be renewed beyond this date, and what needs to change at the BBC if it is? Do you think that many people at home will be watching the BBC and be still happy to pay for that licence fee after we've seen this panorama editing in the documentary and scandal after scandal under the Director General when it came to Hugh Edwards, when it came to lots of different issues regarding the BBC?
Of course, people would look askance at this. And even the TV license issue is already, some people are not happy even paying taxpayer money and paying the TV license. And this way, it might lead to some kind of way of thinking, like making it like Netflix or some privatization of this. And people pay, and it's all right, not obliged to pay this. But this will come in the discussion, which will become before 27, and there is a need to come up with a complete picture and a strategy to do with the editorial and managerial level. And this depends mainly on the kind of person who is going to lead the ship, actually, if he has the right balance between the editorial and the managerial. And to what extent they would influence or face the pressures coming either from the government or from political parties or from the opponents of the BBC. This all depends, but I'm not siding with the fact that the BBC are writing its demise. No, the BBC is the biggest soft power in Britain and the whole world, and it will remain like this. And as I mentioned, that the Secretary of Culture Secretary, she said they need to differentiate between editorial failings and the severe attacks that happen against a well-established establishment like the BBC.
Dr. Fawad Razik, it's great to have you back on the show with your insights and analysis. Thank you. For more on this, I'm joined by trial attorney Richard Roth. Richard, great to have you on the show. So let's get into this. President Trump versus the BBC. Why does Donald Trump want to sue the BBC for $1 billion?
Thank you for having me. The answer is pretty simple. Two reasons. One is Donald Trump is a bully. He likes putting pressure on people, whether it's individuals, whether it's congressmen, whether it's the press. Actually, three reasons. Reason number two is that Donald Trump's whole theme is fake news, and the BBC played right into his theme. How it essentially created this fake news, which bolsters his whole persona. And the third reason, which is the most upsetting, and he's trying to turn history. We know what happened on January 6th. We know what he did, and by continuing to announce that it's not really what happened, it was a friendly visit. The BBC is doing the same thing. All for those three reasons, it plays right into Donald Trump's hand. And it's unfortunate because Donald Trump does trip over himself every day. And the BBC gave him some really good fodder to play with here.
So Donald Trump has successfully sued news organizations over in the US, and we've seen that happen. And it's really interesting that you say that he's a bully, because his argument back and what the lawyers are saying is this editorial decision in the Panorama documentary did change his speech that day. And that's something that he said could have interfered with elections and was incorrect. Do you not see the point of view coming from the White House that Donald Trump did give a speech that was edited badly and put out ahead of the election? Is that not reputational damage and defamation?
Not at all. I mean, technically it is defamation, but reputational damage. First of all, he won the election, so it had no negative effect. If a doctor commits malpractice, but the patient is okay and there's no injury to them, there's no damages. That's number one. Certainly in the U.S. Number two is that Donald Trump's argument that it damages reputation, people already think about Donald Trump what they think. And very few Americans watch the BBC Panorama story and change their vote. In fact, I would say to you, less than a handful would have watched it even and changed their vote. The votes were, first of all, there's early voting. And second of all, the votes were cast mentally long before that date. To argue that it somehow would have changed the election, I think is pomposity, and it's ludicrous. And again, it's giving Donald Trump another avenue to push his agenda. It's unfortunate because you don't have to do that. The BBC could have just followed what he said when he said it, could have even said there's a lapse between what he said, because Donald Trump trips over himself every single day. Today alone, he's now trying to go to this federal court to overturn the liability that he was found for hundreds of $millions by Eugene Carroll. So he is a bully. He will use the court system to try to buttress what is sometimes his ridiculous position.
And I'm sure Donald Trump's not here to defend himself, but I'm sure if he was, he would say that was a well thought out speech, which he has been saying.
Yeah, he sued ABC. He sued the New York Times. He sued Paramount. He's going to sue the BBC. This is the way he is. All of which is just his aggressiveness. He sued he's gone after the actual prosecutors who went after him criminally and the lawyers who went after him civilly. He is a bully. And he is not here to defend himself, but even people that support him acknowledge that if you get in his way, he will try to run you over.
So there's another story that's making headlines today, and I wonder if I can get your opinion on it, Richard. US House Democrats have released new Epstein emails that reference President Donald Trump spending hours with a sex trafficking victim. Trump has consistently denied any wrongdoing in relation to Jeffrey Epstein. But how damaging is this latest revelation to have come out? And the Epstein files are just not going away.
They aren't going away. They're not going away in Great Britain, and they're not going away in the U.S. The Epstein files are damning. Unfortunately, or maybe it's fortunately, people either support Trump or don't, and I don't know if it's necessarily changed their position. But there's been a lot of indicia, a lot of evidence that Donald Trump is in the middle of what Epstein was doing, from notes we've seen, people that have been spoken to in the press. And so the more that comes out, the more unfortunate it is for Donald Trump. Let's not forget, the Republicans and Donald Trump in particular were fighting to not have this released. If there's nothing to hide, why would you not want it released? Add to that the fact that, Ghislaine Maxwell, Donald Trump went in to speak to have his senior attorney speak to her confidentially, and he may very well pardon her to try to not have her talk about him. He's doing everything within his power to essentially remove himself from the situation. But tens of thousands of emails came out literally hours ago, and the Democrats are pouring through it. Let's see what they show. My belief is that Donald Trump's name is going to be in there, if not frequently, at least somewhat. And let's see what the evidence shows on how close he was to Mr. Epstein back in the day.
And just a quick thought, do you think the Republicans will now try to get ahead of this story and possibly release the Epstein files like they did say when they were campaigning to regain the White House? Do you think we're going to see a change in the shift on the Republican Party? Because what has come out is Caroline Leavitt has published a reaction to this, and she says Epstein emails are to smear Trump.
Yeah, I mean, it's not It's certainly a good strategy, whether you're Republican or Democrat. If the bad news is going to come out, preemptively release it. They've been trying to protect Donald Trump for years in connection with Epstein, certainly in the last couple of years. And yeah, it may be best to just try to let it out and then justify it. You know, if someone's done something wrong, the best thing to do is say, this looks bad, but it really isn't what it appears to be. A couple of weeks ago, months ago, there was a card which Donald Trump wrote on, which had this female body. They were very quick in defending what he did. So yeah, it's a typical strategy. They may very well just say, let it out, and we will have to justify it.
And as I said, Donald Trump has always denied any wrongdoing in relation to Epstein. But Richard Roth, good to get your thoughts on both of those stories today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, a Russian foreign ministry official has said Russia is ready to resume peace negotiations with Ukraine in Istanbul. That's according to the Russian state news agency. They said the Russian team is ready for this. The ball is in Ukraine's court. No face-to-face talks have taken place between the two sides since they met in the Turkish city back in July. I'm now joined by John Cavalage, senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight. John, brilliant to have you on the show. Okay, so will the restarting of the talks be fruitful, or is it just another delay tactic we have seen from Russia previously?
It's both. It is a delaying tactic. However, it depends on what your definition of desirable outcome is. The previous discussions, was there a ceasefire agreement? No. But what there was, a continuation of prisoner exchanges and a release of children. So there were some consequential results from those previous meetings that, yes, it didn't stop killing, but if your family member is a prisoner of war and they can come home, whether it's into Ukraine or into Russia, that's really important from a human element. And the war does have a human element. President Zelensky has sent one of his national security officials to Istanbul to engage with the Turkish government in advance of this potential discussion. So Russia wants to show President Trump that they are doing something, that they're engaging. But President Trump now has been burned, so he's not going to jump at the opportunity that Russia may be presenting today.
And as I mentioned earlier, no face-to-face talks have taken place between the two sides since they did meet back in Istanbul in July. And we must remember, as you said, the war grinds on and Russia is gaining territory in southern Ukraine and Pokrovsk as the war just continues and the death continues. Do you think there's enough trust between the two countries to move towards a ceasefire deal? Because, John, you and I have spoken in the past very many times about talks, the potential of a deal, and it all seems to collapse last minute. Is there anything that these two sides can say, okay, we trust each other enough?
Probably not. But I would suggest that, and I know this may sound counterintuitive, or some may just hear it and say he's nuts, but you don't necessarily have to trust who you're negotiating with, because sometimes it's transactional in that there doesn't need to be a long distance to whatever's being discussed and then being implemented. The prisoner of war swaps is one example of that. It's calibrated in such a way that neither side can because of the way the exchanges are actually that they take place. Neither side has an interest to sort of screw around with the other side. Mm-hmm. But on the bigger issue, i.e. the ceasefire that President Trump has wanted since a year ago, it's become more of a heavy lift, and in part because there have been three opportunities thus far this year where there could have been a ceasefire, not necessarily long, but there could have been one that President Trump could have said, okay, I did it. In each case, though, behind the scenes, you had participants from the Russian government, the Ukrainian government, the European Union, NATO, including the US in that, who were all working at their own or for their own objectives that ended up derailing it. So I'm not optimistic we'll see anything substantial, but it is important if they get in the same room, if it's for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, if they come out with prisoner of war swaps, children being returned, just some connectivity, that's a good thing.
Yes, indeed, John. And I want to ask you a little bit about if the talks in Istanbul are actually successful, will we see the US President Trump possibly meeting Vladimir Putin again? Or do you think that the US has kind of bowed out of these talks? Because as you did say to me earlier, President Trump was burned by Russia.
Yeah, the challenge is to make certain that President Trump knows he was burned, because, it's sort of everyone around him knows it, but he's, the consummate, I can make the deal work, I can be the optimist, and everyone else will flow in. I don't think that we'll see a President Putin, President Trump meeting soon. And in large measure, and this goes back to what happened in the last several weeks, with you had them meet, you had then a discussion by telephone, and President Trump said that Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov of Russia, Secretary of State Marco Rubio were the teams were going to get together, then they were going to get together and then move forward with planning for the Budapest summit. But what happened was that during the conversations that Secretary Rubio and Foreign Minister Lavrov had, Secretary Rubio didn't hear what he felt he needed to hear in order for anything to happen that wouldn't embarrass President Trump again. And here's why it's so important, because President Trump listened to Secretary Rubio. The process worked, the normal process for setting a summit where you have teams of advisors working for a long time, and eventually it gets to the Secretary of State, Foreign Minister level. They have sort of a final discussion on, okay, are we on the same page? Are we going to have deliverables? We're not going to have deliverables. And here you had President Trump listening to Secretary Rubio, where he said, we don't have, Mr. President, what I and your team think you need. And the president listened to them. So, that's a good thing.
John Cavillage, I always love listening to you. It's a good thing for me too. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, India's government says Monday's car explosion in Delhi was a terrorist incident carried out by anti-national forces. It comes after Pakistan's government says a blast outside an Islamabad courthouse that killed at least 12 people and injured dozens others was a terrorist attack. Officials there believe a bomber was planning to attack the district courthouse but wasn't able to get inside. Chris Gilbert reports.
The Pakistani government says this is the work of a suicide bomber. Interior Minister Moshe Naqvi is claiming Tuesday's blast happened after a man detonated an explosive-laden jacket in front of this judicial complex, which houses several district courts. He's claiming the attacker detonated the bomb close to a police car after loitering for around 15 minutes. Police and rescue teams rushed the injured to hospital.
We were at the court when suddenly there was a loud explosion. As the blast occurred, a severed head fell inside the premises. After that, one or two arms of the person fell. Then chaos erupted inside the court. We saw a car on fire on the road.
Witnesses say the scene was chaotic.
It was a big blast. There was fire all over. Body parts were strewn. There was chaos. There were 4 to 5 bodies and body parts strewn there. That was what I saw.
Lawyers working at the court say they're standing in solidarity with the victims.
This atmosphere of fear needs to be ended, and we need to try to get all the lawyers together and express our solidarity, and we need to look into our security lapses so that we can rectify them.
Investigations are underway to determine what exactly happened. The government is working to identify the bomber, claiming those involved will be brought to justice. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is alleging that extremist groups actively backed by India are involved. The Indian government is denying this, calling the accusation baseless and unfounded. There are mixed reports that a group linked to the Pakistani Taliban may be involved, which are still being confirmed. The blast comes on the heels of a Monday explosion in the capital of neighbouring India, which killed 8 people. New amateur footage shows the moment of that blast. Families of the victims have been cremating their loved ones, as Delhi steps up security. The pair of explosions threatening to once again escalate tensions between India and Pakistan. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
For more on this, I'm joined by Dr. Bibu Prasad Rautre, who's the former Deputy Director of the National Security Council Secretariat of India. Thank you so much for joining me. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show, Bibu. I just want to start off by talking about Pakistan there. We just heard our reporter talking about it. Pakistan has blamed Indian proxies for being behind the blast that killed 12 people in Islamabad. How accurate is this accusation by Pakistan?
Well, I'll not give much of importance to this. This has become a trend for Pakistan to blame India for what essentially is a problem between Pakistan and Afghanistan. If the TTP terror group is involved in this attack, then Pakistan accuses Afghanistan of sheltering terrorism or the TTP group inside Afghanistan. And the Afghan Taliban continues to deny that. So it's basically a problem between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it's us to imagine that a country like India will be aligned with a proscribed terror group to, say, punish Pakistan or to carry out an attack in Pakistan will be a little far-fetched.
And in a separate incident on Monday, a car exploded in Delhi, killing 8 people and injuring a number of other people. The Indian government now says it was a terror attack. They said that a little bit earlier today. How significant is this development?
Let me sort of start by telling you that the official count of the dead has gone up to 13. This is a significant development because it has happened at the heart of the country, in the national capital. The last terror attack in Delhi happened way back in 2011. The last terror attack on Indian soil outside Kashmir happened way back in 2013 in the southern city of Hyderabad. So the Indians have not really experienced a major terror attack for a very long time. And to the least in Delhi, it has not happened in a very long time. That has sort of may have given some kind of a sense of safety to people, which has been completely shattered and disturbed by this particular incident.
And as you just mentioned to me there, Delhi has witnessed a series of major explosions over the past 2 decades. But like you said, really, people in Delhi haven't witnessed anything like this, and it shattered their calm. Why do you think we are now seeing a resurgence of violence in Delhi? And how is the government, the Modi government, handling it?
Well, investigations are going on. But the preliminary findings and all that has come out in the media and other sources point to the involvement of certain Kashmiri doctors in the entire incident. Now, if that is to be believed and that comes out to be true in the investigation, that will establish a link between this particular attack and what's going on in Kashmir. Now, that gets into a problematic area because if you remember, in 2019, Indian government abrogated its constitution's Article 370. That created a lot of problem in Kashmir. A section of the population within Kashmir are not happy. the rationale for the Indian government was the decision is necessary to end terror in Kashmir. That hasn't happened in the past 6 years. In April, we saw that there was a major attack happening in Kashmir, and which led to a brief war between India and Pakistan. So if the Kashmiris are involved in the Delhi attack, it will establish that they are now willing to take their disenchantment, their sort of sense of hunger to carry out an attack on Indian soil outside Kashmir. So that becomes a problem for Indian government, which has been assuring India, the Indians, that India is more or less terror-free, and Kashmir, all that is going on in Kashmir is a proxy warfare by Pakistan. So at some point of the time, questions will be raised to the government to talk about what's happening about the Indian Kashmiris who are willing to carry out this kind of attack on Indian soil, and what is the Indian government trying to do about that without blaming Pakistan per se.
So President Donald Trump previously said that he had stopped the war between India and Pakistan. We can't forget that these are two nuclear neighbours, two nuclear countries neighbouring each other. Have these deadly blasts set regional tensions on edge again?
It'll be slightly premature to say that, because as things stand today, there is no link between these two blasts. India hasn't yet blamed Pakistan. I don't think India will have any evidence that this particular blast will have any kind of linkages directly with Pakistani terrorists, unlike the thing that happened in April. So India will be circumspect, will be sort of cautious about blaming Pakistan or carry out any kind of a surgical strike the way it did in April or May. Pakistan per se has been blaming India for not just for the Islamabad attack, for the various attacks that have preceded it. But that seems to be some kind of a optics without much value to it. I don't think Pakistan is going to initiate a kind of a war on India. So for the moment, I don't think there will be any kind of regional tension which will escalate into a state of war between the two countries. But the enmity between these two countries has serious repercussions on regional stability. That's there for everybody to see.
Dr. Bibu Prasad Rautre, thank you so much for your time and for joining me this evening. Good to have you on my show. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. US President Donald Trump has formally urged Israeli President Isaac Herzog to pardon Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In a letter, Trump called the corruption trial against Netanyahu political and unjustified, saying a pardon would help unite Israel. Herzog thanked Trump for his support, but stressed that any pardon request must follow official procedures. The Israeli military says it has reopened the Zikim crossing in northern Gaza to allow humanitarian aid trucks into the enclave. The crossing had been closed since September, leaving the area in urgent need of food and supplies. UN agencies welcomed the move, saying it will help deliver aid to areas still suffering from famine across last month's ceasefire. British Health Minister Wes Streeting has denied reports he is plotting to oust Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Streeting called the claims categorically untrue, saying he continues to support Starmer. The rumours came after allies warned a challenge could follow the budget amid Labour's falling poll numbers. A reminder of our top stories. Epstein alleged Trump spent hours with one of his victims in emails released by the Democrats. The White House says it's an attempt to smear the president. President Trump says he has an obligation to sue the BBC over the way it edited a speech he made. India's government says Monday's car explosion in Delhi was a terrorist incident. A Russian foreign ministry official has said Russia is ready to resume peace negotiations with Ukraine in Istanbul. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and, of course, follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.